Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today is just going to be a conglomeration of things in this video because we've got a lot of rumors coming out. We're going to talk about Malik Nabers, Rome Odunze. We're going to be talking about Brandon Aiyuk again because there is some stuff going on there as well. And as well, final thing, we'll be talking about Trevor Lawrence's extension and how it might happen in the next week before the 2024 NFL draft. So really excited. We're not going to stop for anything. We are just going to get right into this stuff. I am going to be recording a ton today. I mentioned that in my last video. This is being recorded literally 3 minutes after. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing I want to talk about, Malik Nabers. I want to talk about Rome Odunze. I want to talk about where do I have him ranked. I want to talk about where Jacksonville might have him ranked. So we have heard from a couple people over the last day that actually it would be, last day would be right. The Jacksonville Jaguars are considered as one of the teams that has Malik Nabers as potentially their top receiver on their draft board. Now, I don't know what goes for Marvin Harrison Jr. I would imagine he's probably ranked higher, but I do know that based off both of these rumors, there are multiple things factoring together. Malik Nabers is the highest priority for this organization at the wide receiver position. And I think when you look at the draft plan for the Jaguars, whether or not they can get up and go get him, and we'll talk about where that might have to happen, I think he's the first plan. I think that's the top priority, and it's at the top of the list. Now, just to read this, this was written in John Shipley's mock draft yesterday, one of his notes on it. He said that some teams will have Nabers as the number one receiver in the draft, while others will have him as number 3, behind Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze. When speaking with team sources in Jacksonville, though, the impression is the Jaguars are extremely high on Nabers. If they move up for a number 1 receiver, I think it will be Nabers. That is exciting for me. I'm just going to be straight with you guys. I've been a huge fan of his for quite a damn while now. I've been advocating for him for a bit too. This is fantastic news. We'll of course have to see what happens, but looking at the time that this was written, right? This was a day ago, essentially. There have been some talks about potential character concerns with Malik Nabers, and I'll highlight why those are there, and I'll give you my opinion on whether I think they're real or not, or what really is it. The major concern, well, there's 2 things. One is that there's a rumor that he did not interview well with teams, which would appear to be bullshit when we're talking about Jacksonville. Just going to say it, because obviously they're very high on him. The other thing, and the more important thing, is that last year, I believe it was, during the college football offseason, Malik Nabers was caught in downtown New Orleans. I believe it was in the French quarters of New Orleans. He was carrying a gun. Didn't do anything with it, but he did not have a license to carry a gun, was caught by the police. He admitted to them that he did not have a license, and he was arrested for it. There were no charges pressed. He simply just had to turn over the gun, wasn't able to get it back, and that was pretty much all they wrote about it. But obviously, you don't want to see your football players and prospects walking around with an unlicensed firearm. Or let me reword that because it's not really what it is. You don't want to see him walking around with a license to carry a firearm. That would be accurate. So that's a bit of a concern, right? But this isn't someone that's had tons of other issues that we know of, and I've watched a lot of interviews on him. I'm not looking at Malik Nabers as this beacon of morality, right? And you're not looking at most players like that anyway. But I don't think that he's someone who's going to come in and just be a complete freaking disaster for a locker room and blow things up. I just don't think that's what he is. I think he's a fine football player. More than a fine football player. I think he's going to be focused on football is what I'm trying to get. I don't think you're going to have those off the field issues like some people are trying to push. And it's not shocking that happens this time of year. And he even said about it, because Jaden Daniels asked him in one of their Instagram live sessions, he just asked him, yeah, Malik, are you high maintenance? And he just said, well, they got to choose someone to say this stuff about. And it is true. This happens every year. So Like, are there some character concerns? Maybe, but that's not stopping me from picking the best player. And that's probably the one area that separates Rome Odunze and Malik Nabers the most, is that, well, Nabers is more so kind of just average as far as character, if not below average, which I don't want to really state where I think he is on that because there's things we just don't know. You can clearly see with Odunze that this is going to be an awesome culture addition if he comes to Jacksonville, and just an extremely likable guy. And that's the major difference. But at the end of the day, like, when I watch him on film, I think both are incredible players. Like, I've rooted for Odunze all year. I watched every game he was in. I was watching Washington football basically every weekend. But at the end of the day, I think Nabers is both the better fit, and I think he's the better player at the next level. Like, he reminds me of Justin Jefferson when I watch him when he plays. He's just an incredible route runner, fantastic athletic traits. The burst is unlike anything you've ever seen from another player. There's just a lot of things I could go on about, but not really here as much to talk about. Like, my whole prospect evaluation, you'll get that later. I'm going to talk about it next week. But point is, like, I'm very high on him. I think that the concerns with him are kind of dumb. I think they're over exaggerated a bit. But this is seen to Jacksonville as the number one receiver, probably for some of the same reasons that I'm talking about now. And the other confirmation of this you see below, and you've been staring at this for the last 5 minutes, is that E_Dilla, our Jaguars insider, it gives us tons of great news all the time and inside reports, and it's exciting to follow him. Like, if you're not on Twitter following him, create a dang account and go follow him. Like, I'm telling you, it's worth your time. But he also mentioned, this was back on April 1st, he was told that Nabers is at the top of their list. So that's good stuff. Like, I mean, it makes it pretty clear to me that this is their top priority. And I think it's a very good top priority to have. And it's a player that, even if you have to give up a lot, say you have to move up and give up a first, I know that's probably the most expensive outcome. I think it's still worth it long term. Like, I think the kind of player you're getting, you're fine taking that for that price. Now, of course, you want to find a way to make it cheaper. And so I think they need to try to understand where he's going to go, know what pick they have to trade up to. My understanding right now, and I think this might be the case for both Nabers and Odunze, is that you might have to move up to pick number 6 to get them. And I'll give you my thought process on that. I think the first 3 picks are pretty clear. I don't think Minnesota trades into the top 3. That's where things could get very different, of course. But what I think happens at the end of the day, I think you get Caleb Williams to Chicago, of course. I think Jaden Daniels is the pick to Washington. And I think the Patriots end up taking probably Drake May. Could be J.J. McCarthy. Regardless, we know Minnesota wants whoever's left. So you get to pick 4. I don't think that the Cardinals are moving out because they want 3 first-round picks to give up the pick. And your competitors are probably not going to do that. I don't think the Broncos are going to mortgage the future. I don't even know if Antonio Pierce has the permission to do that, quite frankly. I'm not sure that happens, right? And so I think Marvin Harrison Jr. goes. I think he gets to pick number 5 with the Chargers. And while everything says with Harbaugh that he just doesn't trade down, it's not what we're hearing. There's a lot of talk about the Vikings and Chargers potentially already having a deal set in stone for draft day that pretty much just depends on the player being there. So I think at pick number 5, you hear everything out of the Chargers organization about the blocking. They want to get stronger in the trenches. They want that kind of player. It makes a ton of sense to move back to 11, go take J.C. Latham. I think that's what we probably see at the end of the day. But ultimately, regardless of who they pick there, I think they're moving back. I think you're going to have a quarterback that goes at 5. And so ultimately your first 5 picks are 4 quarterbacks and Marvin Harrison Jr. You get to number 6, and we heard a report recently. I'll actually pull it up for you guys. I should have had this up before. But the Giants are considered to be leaning towards Rome Odunze at pick number 6. And this is why I say I think this is where you have to trade up to. Because I think if you send a big enough offer, the Giants would consider moving out, first of all. And you look at where Odunze and Nabers are going in this scenario. I think, for one, you clearly would assume Odunze is going at number 6, if this is true. And I trust this source enough to think this is at least where things are right now. We got a whole nother week. Things can change. That's just how it is. But right now, I think that's what they would do. And if you get to pick number 7, even if Joe All is on the board for the Titans, they made it very clear this offseason when they were talking about it that they would take the wide receiver over the offensive tackle if the value of both players is identical. They have also said in Tennessee that they do not have a set starter at slot receiver yet. So with how much money they spent in free agency over the last couple of years with DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, do you think they want to spend on their player at receiver? Or do you think they want to draft one? They're going to draft one. And Malik Nabers, well, I think he can play outside, of course. Like, he played a ton in the slot. And so you're looking at Tennessee sitting there at number 7, potentially with the best slot receiver in 10 years on the board. And what do you think they're going to do? If they prefer wide receiver over offensive tackle, and Malik Nabers is this good, I think they're taking Malik Nabers. And I think Joe Alt makes it to 8. So I think pick number 6 is probably what we're looking at if we're going to move up. Now, there are so many ways things can go, and something's probably going to be wrong with that projection. Something will fall apart somewhere, realistically. And most scenarios are probably going to have it where one of the receivers falls to 8. All it takes is 4 quarterbacks and Joe Alt to go off the board before pick number 8. And you're guaranteed one of those wide receivers. But I think if you want your choice, if you want to have a deal in place before draft night that should hold together, unless the worst case scenario probably is that J.J. McCarthy is available to the Giants there, you probably want to move up to pick number 6 to get it done. I think that's realistically where they need to go. So we'll see what happens. Of course, that's a big price to pay. If it was me, I'd be looking at a 3-team trade here, trying to get the price down, trying to find maybe a team that wants to move out more. Like, my big brain thought, and this won't happen, but just to kind of give you an idea of my thinking, I would wonder, why wouldn't you trade, let's say with Atlanta at pick number 8, as you maybe hear the thunder in the background, it's a rainy day where I'm at. You could move up to pick number 8 with Atlanta. They need a cornerback or an edge. There's going to be plenty available at 17. There's going to be a very good player there. It'd be very unlikely that's not the case. So I think they'd be a willing team to move down. I think you could flip your second. I think you could flip maybe a later pick. And then you're looking to swap with the Giants at number 6. Here's the thought process. If the Giants want Odunze and the Titans need a slot receiver, the Titans aren't taking Odunze, right? It's just not realistic. So if that's the case, you just tell the Giants, hey, like, we want Nabers. You're still going to get your guy. The only way you don't is if someone trades in a 7, which I don't think the Titans are doing that. If Joe Alt's on the board, they're just going to take him. So you can still get your guy. We just want ours. Like, we can flip you a pick and let's get this deal done. And I don't think it costs everything that you have in your wallet to go get it done. So that's just an idea I have. I don't think that happens, right? Like, it's hard to predict ever a 3-team trade. That's basically never going to happen. But that would be my thought process on how you'd get that done. I think more realistically, they're just saying, okay, well, we're moving from 6 to 17. We want a first, and you're probably giving that up in the future. But I hope Jacksonville attempts to get creative with this, find a way to preserve those future picks, get it done this draft. They don't do a lot with their later picks anyway. Try to give those up. You know, even if it's a lot of them, that's going to be the better option for this team, at least in my opinion. But that's our Malik Nabers talk. I do think he is the top receiver for Jacksonville. I do think they'll have an opportunity to go get him. I do think they're at least going to be calling on draft day to try to go get him. It's just a question of, like, how far is he going to fall? I don't think you can trade with Tennessee. I think that's out of the question. I think that's the floor. I think the earliest you trade up is 6. So to me, it's like, if you want one of them, move to 6. If you want Rome Odunze, pray he falls to 8. But I don't know if he does. So that's kind of where we're at with receiver. But talking about receiver even more and why this stuff could be irrelevant very soon, we're hearing that the Jaguars and the Aiyuk rumors are heating back up. We also heard recently from a Steelers writer that they were saying the Steelers were wanting Brandon Aiyuk, and they were simply just discussing the negotiation of the trade, like what they would have to give up. It sounds like, so early on, there was all this talk about how it was going to be a second plus change. That's what I was told about the original trade. And then we heard they wanted a first and they wanted Zay Jones. So they wanted 17 and Zay Jones. Now we hear from the Steelers, from one of their writers, not necessarily in the organization, but someone who said they had sources, that now they're apparently looking at giving up a second plus change. So if the price is changing like that, and Jacksonville's interested again, maybe the idea that people have been floating out for a while about maybe flip from 17 to 31, the 49ers can get up, they can get their receiver there. Maybe that makes a lot of sense, and you can get your receiver that way, and now you're set. You've got a good complementary piece to the offense, someone who's going to be the top receiver, going to be productive. That makes a lot of sense for Jacksonville. So it is possible, and it is back on the table again, that Aiyuk could be heading to Jacksonville. I think he could also, of course, be heading to Pittsburgh. There's other teams involved too, but that is heating up right now. So that's another thing going on. So a lot of conversation with wide receiver about what's going to happen. We pretty much at this point know everything that we can know. And we'll see probably within the week what happens on draft day. But your last bit of information regarding receiver, and then we'll get into Trevor Lawrence a little bit in this extension, is this post by Pretty Ricky. He was the guy who was breaking the Giants-Panthers Brian Burns trade, broke it days before, broke multiple things throughout free agency. He got his account shut down actually multiple times during the course of all that because people were pissed that he seemingly knew stuff. I say seemingly because technically is it possible that he just happened to guess everything? Sure. But I think he has some sources at least. He may have some that aren't legitimate, but most things he's put out have been realistic and they've started to take place. So we're going to look at one of them. Well, he had to say today, this morning around 10 o'clock my time, this will be 11 Eastern, he said, I've been told that the Jaguars have interest in Brandon Aiyuk, but they really want to get the Lawrence deal done first. He'll be the highest paid quarterback in the league soon. So we'll kind of digest this. We're going to talk about what this could be. So I also want you to note, as I say this comment here, talking about a second rounder for Brandon Aiyuk again. So we'll see where that lands. But talking about Brandon Aiyuk, you have another confirmation that they're looking at this. Now, when can it happen? It sounds like it's dependent on the Trevor Lawrence deal getting done. And so we've heard rumors even before this that they're actually relatively close on it. Now you're looking at if they're going to flip a pick this year, it has to take place in the next week if the Aiyuk trade's going to happen. So for the Aiyuk trade to happen, you also know Lawrence has to get his deal done. That's going to happen in the next week. So it sounds like Jacksonville is very close to a deal. Now, getting into the last part of this, he will be the highest paid quarterback in the league soon. I really wonder if this is going to be an incentive-driven contract. I don't know that he actually ends up being the highest paid when we look at cap numbers, what actually counts, because those are very different numbers than what the contract value is reported as. For example, with Josh Allen, he was reported at a $150 million over 5 years contract. That would be $30 million a year. Then we looked at the actual numbers as far as cap numbers. It's projected at $125 million. So that's $5 million a year less. So that might be what happens with Trevor Lawrence. And we know that there's been some talk about maybe getting more of a team-friendly deal done. So I really wonder if what happens is that there's a lot of incentives involved in this so that, hey, like if you have a great year, you're going to get paid more. But what's nice for Jacksonville is the way incentive-driven deals work, the only way those incentives count against the cap is if they would have been earned the previous year and they would have been earned during the year of the contract. So I'll give you an example. let's say that the Jaguars had signed Leonard Floyd this offseason. Just going to throw out a random name to you. You can have an incentive in the contract to say if he gets 10 sacks, he gets paid $5 million. We're going to throw out some random numbers for this. So if he gets 10 sacks in 2024, he will get $5 million. For that to count against the cap, what has to happen is that in 2023, the year before he signed the deal, he would have needed 10 sacks. And in 2024, he would also have needed 10 sacks. So the way that's described is that it's the incentives likely to be earned, which are determined off the previous year. If those incentives are earned, they count against the cap number. Now, say he got 10 sacks last year, and then this year he gets 8. He's not getting the $5 million this year, and he's not counting $5 million more against the cap because he didn't earn it, and he was only likely to get it. He did not get it. So this is a huge part of how teams negotiate contracts. Because, for example, let's talk about like how you could do Cam Robinson's deal. If they restructure it and it is just a matter of waiting for the draft, seeing if like a left tackle falls into their lap or a right tackle, if they want to kick Anton over, you could see maybe with Cam Robinson where they say, okay, so let's say he played, and this number is going to be wrong, let's say he played 480 snaps last year. You could have an incentive-laden deal where you say, okay, Cam, we're going to pay you $10 million for the base, some of that signing bonus, and then if you play 500 snaps, we're going to pay you $3.5 million more. So when Cam Robinson plays 500 snaps, if he stays healthy, he earns that, but it doesn't go against the cap because he was not likely to earn that. Incentives you are not likely to earn do not count against the salary cap. So that might be some of the thinking with Trevor Lawrence's contract. And so if Trevor Lawrence is a little inconsistent, it's not really hitting them on the cap. The only way it's hitting him on the cap is if he is consistently back-to-back years having this production. So that's the whole point of saying all that. And you got your little lesson on some of the salary cap stuff there. But I do think this stuff is legit, just based off everything we heard from him. I mean, he, for example, like he broke the Marquise Brown signing to the Chiefs days before it took place. There's multiple things I can throw out there. He even talked about the Jacksonville deal with Calvin Ridley. He told everyone before it was reported that there was a division contender that got involved in the discussions to try to derail it. We knew all of that from him. So he knows what he's talking about. Now, is it possible he gets something wrong? Of course it is. But if you want to figure out what's going on with some of this stuff, or at least get a good idea, I recommend you follow him. You can see his handle here. It's at least good to get your stuff right and generally be on the right track. So it may seem like, okay, we're just talking about these random accounts. These are not random accounts. These are insiders. These are people who have proven through their work that the things they say are legitimate. So I do trust them. That's why I bring this to you. And that's why I think that these might be legitimate things, or at least are on the right track. So that's a lot we had to talk about. We talked about Malik Nabers versus Rome Odunze, having Nabers higher on their board, looking at trading up for him. They're very high on him. So this is huge news. This might impact the draft. But what comes first is seeing if they can get Aiyuk, if that's the second rounder. Then we talked about how that ties in to the Trevor Lawrence deal. So my point with all this, we might have a lot of videos this next week because we might have a lot of news. We might have Trevor Lawrence getting signed and Aiyuk gets traded for, it's just Trevor Lawrence getting signed and they make a draft pick and it's Nabers or whatever it is. It's going to be a crazy week. There's a lot of things going on. There's a deadline for many of these things too. Keep your eyes open because something might be happening in the next few days. We'll have to wait and see. But thank you guys for joining me. Give me your thoughts on this. Would you do these things? Are you high on Nabers or Odunze? I know a lot of the fan base loves Odunze, and I love them both. Like, to be clear, both are phenomenal players. I just have Nabers higher on my board. That's the only difference. But let me know what you think. Love to hear it. Love being able to come out and talk to you about this stuff. It's really exciting. We got some news coming out, or at least rumors, before the 2024 NFL draft. So Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your day. And finally, go Jags.